All right, well, welcome to our fourth and final presentation. Um, the title is The Night Shift, Nocturnal Pollinators at Work. Presenter is Jennifer Hopwood. She's a senior pollinator conservation specialist at the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation and is based in Omaha, Nebraska. She provides resources and training for pollinator and beneficial insects, habitat management, and restoration in a variety of landscapes. She has a master's in entomology from the University of Kansas and is co-author of several books. Right, well, welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks, all. Can you hear me okay from this distance? Okay, that's great. I'm going to work on navigating the mouse as a pointer today. And isn't this picture lovely? It's so hot outside today. I have really enjoyed looking at this picture, thinking about cooler times, and they are coming soon. Okay, as a brief background, I'm with Xerces Society. Xerces is a nonprofit conservation organization. It's been around almost 55 years, and it's named for this butterfly pictured up here. This is the Xerces blue butterfly. It lived on coastal California, right outside San Francisco, and it was last seen in the 1940s. And so when our organization was founded by the lepidopterist Robert Michael Pyle, who's also since become a well-known author, it was really founded with the goal of preventing future extinctions of butterflies. But since we've expanded the scope of our mission to include all sorts of other invertebrates, and invertebrates are animals without backbones, and they make up 75% of the diversity of species on our planet, a huge chunk of life. The work of Xerces spans on-the-ground habitat restoration. We're involved in active research as well. We have some community science projects to get folks involved in gathering more data all over the country. And then we're also involved in education outreach. So that's a bit about Xerces. And I am a remote officer. Our home office is in Portland, Oregon, but we do have offices now throughout the country, including me in Omaha, and I have 3 colleagues in Lincoln and 1 over in Boone, Iowa for the Iowans here. So we now have, when I started, there was only me in the central states, and now we have quite a number of staff, which is really wonderful. All right, so when we think of pollinators, we think of all the critters that we see during the daytime, active out on flowers, when it's light outside. We see butterflies, we see hummingbirds, we see bees, we see it all, and we all see it during the day because that's when we're active. That's also when we can take photographs, right? I am not talented at taking photographs at night, but we shouldn't sleep on the nocturnal pollinators. See that pun I just squeezed in there? I've been waiting for that one. Nocturnal pollinators are those pollinators that are active at nighttime. And I know that myself, even though I've been working in pollinator conservation for about 20 years, I definitely have a daytime bias. But it turns out more and more that we're learning about nocturnal pollinators, that they are pulling their weight and more. They're very active at nighttime, and they're visiting some of the same flowers that daytime pollinators visit, and they're doing really good work. So essentially, what we thought is fairly straightforward plant pollinator networks are actually a lot more complex because there's things happening when we're not watching. This is true not only for wild plants, but also for crop plants. This is really turning the paradigm on its head, that something like a moth could be a significant pollinator of certain crops is really new information. So as new research is emerging, there's new appreciation for a lot of different critters out there. So nocturnal insects, moths and beetles, which we'll dive into a little bit more, do contribute to pollination of certain crops, apples, brambles like raspberries and blackberries, and more. But this is a very understudied area. There aren't a lot of pollination biologists that go out at night and monitor those plants at night. So if you were in the audience and you're thinking, I need some research, this could be your area. It's wide open. So why are these plants seeking pollinators after dark? What's in it for them? And there are plants that are open all day and all night. And then there are plants that are open only during the day, and they have sort of a circadian rhythm, just like we do, that tells them when to move and when to close up at nighttime. So they close up at nighttime, and that helps them save moisture, likely, and resources. But there are also plants that open up only at nighttime and that are closed during the day. So this plant here, this is in the evening primrose group, and this is a plant that's triggered to open at dusk at the crepuscular hours. And then this over here on the right is a cactus, and it's only open for a few short nights. So it opens only at night, and it really only blooms for 2, maybe 3 nights. And the current thinking on this is that this is a water-saving mechanism for plants. If you bloom at nighttime, you're less likely to lose water. So if you're in a really dry area, humidity is higher at nighttime, the temperature is lower, the wind speed is lower, so you can save water if you're a plant by opening at nighttime. And those plants that do exclusively open at nighttime, they have different strategies to attract pollinators. Daytime flowers are usually very colorful, with a wide range of colors, and they have all sorts of shapes and sizes to attract certain critters. Night flowering flowers usually are very pale in color, so white or light yellow or light pink, something that will reflect moonlight and will be easier to contrast with dark so that those animals can spot those flowers easier. And you can see in the case of this primrose, those petals are large and they're just big and they're open. So they're pretty showy, but they have a lot of surface area to reflect lots of light. The other strategy they use is they emit at a particular time a really powerful scent. So this could be a powerful scent that they release right when they're also making their nectar available, because some plants release nectar at certain times of the day when they know their pollinator is going to be more active. So they'll release this rush of fragrance, and pollinators will use that to find the flower. So those are nighttime blooming flower strategies. And the groups that visit those plants, the main groups are moths up here in this corner, bees, beetles, and bats. And then to a lesser extent, there are some other insects out there like crickets and ants, thrips, little tiny creatures that are hard to see, and ants also that visit flowers at nighttime. But they aren't doing pollination to the same extent as these other groups. And then you might be saying, bats, that doesn't sound right. It is, yes, it's not relevant to us in Nebraska. There are no nectar feeding bats in our part of the country, only insect feeders. These bats that visit flowers are in the southwest US. So this is the last time I'm going to talk about them. But these other 3 groups you can find in your own yard at night. And although I'm referring to many of them as nocturnal, they aren't all exactly nocturnal. Many of them are active around dusk or dawn, so during that crepuscular hour, which is the most delicious word ever, crepuscular. It's just wonderful. But basically when deer come out, when rabbits come out, that's when these critters start to be active too. And then there are critters that are also active only at night after dark. So it isn't quite as cut and dry as daytime, nighttime. All right, so the first group to talk about are bees. And by and large, the vast majority of bees are daytime flyers. They're out when it's sunny. But there are some that come out at dawn really early. Sometimes, for example, are there gardeners in here, vegetable gardeners that grow squash? Sometimes there's a group of bees known as squash bees, and those bees are out even before the sun is up, just waiting for the squash flower to pop open, and then they're there. So they're coming out at dawn, they're coming out in the evening, and some of them will also fly a little bit later after dusk until it's dark, and they use the moonlight to orient in that case. Okay, so this bee here, you might notice, is a day-flying bee. This bee is a crepuscular bee flying into the evening times. The big difference you probably spotted are these little objects on the top of their head. These are the compound eyes over here. This is what bees use to see with. But these simple eyes, known as ocelli, those are on the top of the head. And those structures are used to let in light and help bees orient. So the bigger they are, the more light that comes in. And you'll notice right off that the crepuscular bee has larger ocelli. That's because they need all the help they can get getting light in to help them orient, because they're flying when there's low light outside. The cool thing about this bee, and it does have a distribution here in Nebraska, is that it specializes just on evening primroses. So when that flower starts to open up, that's when you can find this bee. Oh, one other thing I should say about crepuscular bees, we don't have a lot of them. They tend to be more active in warmer areas. And that is because in our part of the country, sometimes at night, even in summertime, it gets a little bit cooler. It's harder for insects to fly in cooler temperatures. But if you live in Texas, it is just hot all the time. So they are happier to fly at nighttime. The bees are. Next up are beetles. And beetles are considered to be really messy pollinators because they eat the pollen itself, but they also eat the plant parts. So they get all in there and pollen gets all over their bodies. And they do transfer it. They really like open flowers. This is a magnolia flower here. So really open and big, accessible for beetles to get into. Or they like flowers like wild ginger that are stinky. Essentially, they produce a fragrance it's just not really appealing to us. It kind of smells like carrion a little bit, so beetles are there for that. And then next up are moths, and these are the insects that are really doing the heavy lifting at nighttime by the vast majority. Moths are in the order Lepidoptera, which also includes butterflies, but moths are far more diverse. In the United States, there's 11,000 species. That's a huge number of species. Just for perspectives, there's about 4,000 bee species, so way more moths. Here in Nebraska, there's 1,600, with more being discovered every single year, and if you visit the Nebraska Lepidoptera table out there, those folks are the folks keeping track of the species in the state. So definitely go out and chat with them. They have amazing knowledge, and that website is excellent. So moths are really diverse, and as I mentioned, butterflies are related to moths. Moths evolved first, and butterflies are their own little group that evolved from moths. So if you're a moth biologist, you might say butterflies are actually just fancy moths, but certainly butterflies are more well-known and so forth. Anyway, butterflies are day active. Moths are both day active and active at night. But if you're wondering, how can I tell the difference if I'm outside looking around? You might be tempted to think butterflies are very showy and beautiful. Moths are kind of drab. Well, there are drab butterflies also. Sorry, Skipper. But you are brown, so, and they're also gorgeous patterned moths. So don't use color as a rule of thumb is the short story. But what you can use is antenna and how they hold their wings. So butterflies hold their wings upright vertically over their body, kind of like a tent, and moths hold them back over their body, a little bit like a cape. And then butterflies have hooked antenna, or they have little projections on the end of their antenna, whereas moth antennae are straight and at a point at the end, or they are feathery in the case of some males, occasionally some females, but mostly males. So those are some clues to help differentiate butterflies versus moths. But you could probably just default to a moth and you'd be right, because there's way more species of moths out there than butterflies. And moths have a complete metamorphosis life cycle, which means they just have 4 life stages. But these life stages all look different, and the 2 that feed on different food sources. So it all starts with the egg, which is laid on their host plant, and then the egg hatches into larvae, which are also known as caterpillars. Those caterpillars consume vegetation, various plant parts. Moths eat every single plant part that you can think of, roots all the way up to other flowers and such. And as they grow in size, because insects have an exoskeleton, they have to occasionally shed that exoskeleton in order to grow. So they go through several different phases of growth as caterpillars known as instars. They start out so teeny tiny. Also at the Nebraska Lepidoptera table, they have caterpillars you can look at. So you definitely do that. It's pretty cool, of different sizes. And they progressively get larger and larger and larger. When finally they've reached their fat level, they will transform into the pupa inside a cocoon. And during that phase, they rest, they don't feed, they rearrange their body tissues. And then, what seems like a miracle to me, they emerge as an adult, looking completely different than their previous life stages. Some adults don't feed at all. They don't have mouth parts. They only live for a few days. And during those few days, they find a mate and they reproduce, and then they die. Other moths have proboscises. They retrieve nectar, they drink nectar. That nectar provides them with energy. They can live weeks or longer. All right. So just a couple quick notes about caterpillars. Caterpillars take this lush, amazing growth of vegetation, which is pretty hard to eat for the vast majority of animals on the planet. It's hard to digest plants for most animals, but caterpillars take this and they turn it into this, which is essentially lots of fat and protein. And caterpillars start out, as I said, teeny tiny, like somewhere weighing like half to a fourth the weight of a paperclip, so a couple milligrams. And then eventually they turn into this, which is somewhere around 15,000 milligrams, which is still only about 6 ounces, but it's big for an insect and heavy for an insect. And like I said, full of fat and protein and delicious for a lot of animals. And that includes not just small animals, but big animals, like grizzly bears. Miller moths, for example, this moth down here, in the middle of the summer, they congregate in high numbers in rocks in the Rocky Mountains and in Yellowstone, and they're an incredibly important food source for grizzly bears that are looking during the summertime to put on as much weight as possible because, of course, they sleep the whole winter long. It seems like a good strategy. And they are eating tons of Miller moths, as much as they possibly can, in some cases up to 40 Miller moths a day. But it just really speaks to the amount of protein and fat that those moths have, that they're such an important food source for these huge animals. But they're also a really important food source for small animals too. Of course, birds really depend on caterpillars for their diet. Something like 93% of songbirds feed their young insects. So the health of our insect community is really tied to the health of bird communities, hands down. But it's not just birds, it's also other insects, it's also mammals, small mammals as well. But this is a huge downside if you're a caterpillar, right? This is great if you're a wildlife biologist. It's bad if you're a caterpillar. Something like 90% of moths don't make it to adulthood. So that's a lot. So it's tough out there. So this is why a lot of moths have strategies to avoid predators. In this case, this adult looks a lot like bird poop. And I'm not even getting into the caterpillar strategies, which would be really cool, but they're pretty extensive. And then this moth on this side blends in really well to the tree trunk. But this brings me to the strategy that we are here to talk about, which is to come out at night. This is also a strategy to avoid predators. There aren't a lot of birds hunting moths at nighttime. There are a lot of birds hunting during the day. So a couple quick notes about moths. They are attracted to light They use the moon to help them orient and to fly. And just like sailors used to use the North Star to find a location and then find a way to travel in a straight line from that angle, that's how moths navigate using the moon as well. But when we have a more close, less distant light source like a porch, it interferes with how moths navigate, so they no longer have a distant point to navigate to. They have one that's really close, and it just makes them bumble and spin and fly and get disrupted. So that's one of the ways in which artificial light can impact moths. It just really changes how they forage and how they search for mates, and for those that migrate, how they migrate.
Question?
Mm-hmm.
What about the little lights that some of us have in our gardens, like the little solar lights that big enough to bother that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Do you mind if we hold that for a few minutes? We'll come back to that. Okay. So speaking of moths finding their mates and finding food, they do this using their antenna. That's how they detect smells in the environment. So females emit pheromones, lots of scents, and the males, using their really powerful antenna, detect those pheromones, track them down, and they mate, and then they reproduce. And as I mentioned, there are many moths that don't feed as adults, like this moth right here. This is a Luna moth, and they don't have mouth parts. They just have a few short days of life before their energy runs out. They rely on all the energy they stored up in the caterpillar phase to survive as adults without food. So their goal is to find a mate as fast as possible and reproduce before they die. On the other hand, we have, this is a noctuid moth, and here's its really long tongue. They drink nectar because they can feed. Their lifespan extends quite a lot longer. And they use their antenna not only to find mates, but also to detect that fragrance that draws them into flowers to get the energy they need. And it's these moths that visit flowers that are doing pollination, that are contributing to pollination. So the beautiful Luna moth over here, because it doesn't visit flowers, is not a pollinator, but it's doing all sorts of other good ecological things. Those moths that are contributing to pollination visit a wide variety of flowers for nectar. They're not usually very choosy. They might visit whatever has the most nectar load that particular night. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later too, but the things that you see open during the day that are very attractive are probably the things that are attractive to nighttime pollinators as well. Moths are pretty fuzzy. They carry pollen on their underbellies and sometimes on their face, around their mouth. This is an armyworm moth, which is a pest of some crops, but it's also contributing to apple pollination. And you can see she's buzzing her wings. That vibration releases pollen as well. Some species of bees do that too, to release pollen. So in this way, moths can be contributing to crop pollination, as I mentioned. And what's really interesting about moths is that they can fly long distances. Many bees are tied to a particular place because females are building a nest, so they don't really want to travel too far afield because it takes a lot of energy to fly, for one thing, and you have to fly all the way back and drop off those stored resources and then go again. So they tend to stay in a certain radius from their nest. Moths are not tied to a nest, so they can travel long distances, and this means that they take pollen from some plants in one place and can take it quite a long distance to spread that pollen to another plant population. That's great for gene flow. There are a couple of specific moth-flower relationships to mention. This is not the yucca moth, a yucca moth, because there are species for different yucca, but they pollinate flowers within the yucca genus. And this is the only species I know that actually intentionally pollinates a flower. But these moths find each other, females and males find each other on the flowers, they mate. Females then go and search. First, she scrapes off pollen and she intentionally gathers pollen, and then she takes it to another yucca plant, and she searches for flowers where there are no other female visitations, which she can detect through her antenna. And if it's a pretty fresh flower, she will make that her flower, and she deposits the pollen, again, intentionally on the stigma, pollinating the plant. And she does that because when the fruits and seeds are produced, that's the food for her young. So she'll lay her eggs there and her young feed on the fruits and seeds. There's still plenty left over for the plant to reproduce. But the caterpillar will grow, and then it drops off and pupates in the soil, and then will emerge the next year, and then the cycle begins again. But pretty amazing. So this yucca plant is exclusively pollinated by this moth. Well, and each species has its own moth. Okay, over here are the fringed orchids, eastern fringed orchid, western fringed orchid. They have really long nectar spurs, as you can see here, so that's just a long tube all filled with nectar. But this is so long that not even a bumblebee with a long tongue could get down in there. So what pollinates it? It's hawk moths, also known as hummingbird moths, with a really long tongue that can get down in there. And that's important for the flower because it has sacs of pollinia, just sacs of pollen that are attached to the flower, and they get attached to the moth's face, and it takes those sacs with it on to the next flower where it deposits them. So pretty specialized relationships. And to be super clear, these plants could not survive without these moths. Okay, so like many other groups of insects, there's data out there that indicates that groups of moths are in decline in some places. But patterns of moth decline are not straightforward. It depends on the time and the place and some other variables. So for example, in a place where there's not a lot of human disturbance, like in the thick of the Missouri Ozarks, in those forested areas, there are no declines of moths detected. The highest rates are in those areas where there's lots of human activity or really intense agriculture. So in this graph here on the x-axis is just the level of urbanization, and you can see no matter whether they're looking at large moths or different generalists or specialists, and even those species that prefer warmer or cooler temperature, the trend is consistent overall. In really highly urban areas, there are fewer moths. And light pollution and pesticide use seem to be the driving factors of those declines. So there are some steps that we can take to conserve our nighttime pollinators. And you'll notice that these very much mirror our daytime pollinator conservation activities as well. First off, we provide habitat in various forms. We reduce artificial lighting. That's where your question will come back in. And we'll avoid pesticides. And then really, one important way of closing that loop is everyone sharing that information with their loved ones or in whatever capacity they have. And it can start with us. In whatever spaces we live, work, play, we can make a difference for pollinators on different scales. And even habitat in a garden is very valuable for pollinators. Small scale habitat, even a porch, a pot, all of it is beneficial. And habitat for nighttime pollinators is plenty of nectar to fuel the adults. So wildflowers, shrubs that bloom, trees that bloom. But a key component is also food to feed the caterpillars. And moth caterpillars eat a wide range of plants. It could be, so many things, everything. But there are some really good choices. Could be wildflowers like liatris or sunflowers. It could be shrubs like willow. It could be trees like chokecherry or anything in the genus Prunus. American plum, for example, sandhill plum, all the plums. Oaks are really incredibly valuable, supporting a wide range of species, maples, hazel, linden, birch. If there's a native plant out there, there's probably a moth that feeds on it. And there are some, like trees especially, can be extremely valuable because they can support, there's a huge amount of biomass, right? So they can support a lot of species. But you can pick native plants, you can support caterpillars. Native plants is where it starts. That's true also for the food for adults. Although moths are generalist species for nectar, of course, these native plants are the things they evolve with, and you want to plant the things that their caterpillars need anyway. If you want to target plants that support nighttime pollinators, you can't go wrong with evening primrose or things in Enothera. Check those out. And then also other white flowers, you could do asters, you can do mountain mint, buttonbush is good, monarda. These all produce a lot of nectar. And no matter your space, no matter your soil, there's a native plant out there that will do well in it. Okay, in addition to food, you also need shelter as part of habitat. And the key component of the life cycle for many moths, also beetles, is that they do need a place to overwinter. And that it often takes the form of overwintering in the top layer of soil or in the leaf layer, or with plant material layer. So you can do more for insects by doing less in the fall. And you can rake your leaves into a pile on your garden beds or under trees, under shrubs. I do it sometimes in my vegetable garden, also in flower beds or under trees or shrubs. And those leaves support not only overwintering cocoons or caterpillars of moths, but they also support lady beetles, lacewings, sometimes queen bumblebees. There are a lot of different insects that need that layer of insulation. So that's habitat. Leaves are your habitat. And that takes us to light pollution. Light pollution can be a threat to moths and to pollination. More than half the United States has some level of light pollution, and here we are in eastern Nebraska or western Iowa. And we too, yes, I too, in Omaha can't see much from my yard, unfortunately. But light pollution can disturb how these animals move through the landscape, how they find their mates, how they find food, and their periods of activity as well. Also important is that it actually seems to be increasing predation of moths too, so making them more vulnerable. And that all has consequences for the pollination services they provide. So artificial lighting reduces visits to flowers, which means fewer fruits and seeds produced. All right, so the things you can do, you can change the spectrum a little bit. Warm light is much brighter. You can shift to cool light. Red filters are also good and helpful, but wherever possible, turn off those exterior lights. You can put things on motion sensors or on timers. That can be really helpful. In some cases, if you've ever been to Florida, they shield lights during certain times of the year so that baby turtles aren't pulled away from the moon, telling them to go out to the ocean, and instead end up at a hotel. So they shield those lights. That can be important as well for insects. And then things as simple as closing our shades at nighttime can be good too, because our light can spill out into the outdoors. So moths can get distracted by our home lights. So those are just some small ways to help. You asked about solar lighting, and I don't really know how those might impact moths. You could take a look and tell me, though. I'd love to know if you go out around 9 or 10 and just see if there's anything flying. Yeah, it's a question I've wondered about myself, because sometimes some of those lights are so powerful they're on until 5 a.m. But they're probably a much lesser concern than the patio lights that are on all night and are really bright. Those are the ones you can turn off. So reducing artificial lighting is an important component. Next up is reducing pesticides. Pesticides are meant to attack, they're used to attack pests in many cases, but in many cases they're also broad spectrum. So they impact not just the pests, but also all these other critters. And in some cases, pesticides can end up in pollen and nectar or in leaves. That directly impacts caterpillars that are eating those leaves or moths that are drinking that nectar. So there are ways to use pesticides to reduce exposure to these animals by using them very selectively and applying them in ways that's very selective, and then selecting products that are the most selective, least harmful. But whenever possible, avoiding their use is good. Rather than reaching for it as the first solution, trying to manage your pests in other ways before you bring it in. And sometimes that can just start with changing your perspective about what damage is and if that damage is actually causing harm to your plant. Because plants are actually designed to be eaten, that they're used to it. They have all sorts of systems to help them reduce herbivory, but they also are just used to responding to herbivory. Sometimes that means they increase their growth, they grow in different ways, they pump out a chemical that makes them taste worse to things. So we don't always need to worry about it when they're eating the plants. And one way to think about it is if you see things that are gnawing on your leaf, your yard is doing its job. That's what you want it to be. You want it to be serving as habitat. There are also lots of predators and parasitoids out there that are also working to control the things that are causing that damage. And sometimes we also just have to wait a little bit till they step in to do their work. Okay, lastly, I mentioned how important it is for spreading the word. And this can be if you really love to give talks, it can be like that, or it can be you getting involved in your community, helping to plant something at a church or school, or it could just be you putting a sign in your yard and talking with your neighbors. That is also really important. I have next door neighbors who have really developed a love for bumblebees. They are volunteers for the Bumblebee Atlas in Nebraska. They've been doing it for several years. And they volunteered to do a grid cell that's out west in western Nebraska. So they'll travel 6 hours to find that grid cell, and then they'll stay in a hotel for a couple days and they'll sample that grid. And what's really neat about this, that is so neat, all of it, but what's really cool is that they will put the pictures that they take out in the field in their Christmas letter out to their family, and they'll put bumblebees in there and they'll talk about their experience. And when they're out there sampling bumblebees in the field, they'll talk to people that stop on the road and ask them, what the heck are you doing? And they'll tell the story about why they're doing this bumblebee sampling. And their family members now in turn have come to them with questions about bumblebees, like, hey, I think I saw this bumblebee in my yard. Can you double check? And then they'll start sending them photos and they'll start asking more questions. And to me, that's so powerful. They have just created this network, the safe place where all their family can come and ask the questions and learn from them informally. So we can all do that. It doesn't have to be for our family, but it could be for our friends and neighbors too. There are also formal ways to get involved too, like through the Atlas project I mentioned. The Iowa Atlas is active. The Bumblebee Atlas in Iowa is active now. The Nebraska Atlas is still running on a shoestring. So you could get involved in those projects. There's lots of opportunities for butterflies. I was thinking, is there a formal moth count? There should be a moth count. Anyway, there are opportunities to get involved through the North American Butterfly Association to sample butterflies. There should be a moth count though. Anyway, you can get involved in those. We have lots of resources available online. I did bring some. I will put those out in a little bit, but these can all be downloaded for free and are available through our website, xerces.org. And then just to say thanks to our donors. We are a donor-driven organization. Their funding goes directly to support our work, which has been really important in recent months, in particular, to have that source of solid funding. So thank you to our donors. And I hope that you stay up a little bit later and get to see some really cool small wildlife in your own space. I know for me it's been really eye-opening. And yeah, and I have a ton to learn about moths because wow, there's a lot out there. Okay, time for questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so you talked about the nocturnal activity of adult moths. What about in their caterpillar stage? Is it nocturnal activity for them also?
No, usually they're more active during the day, and then at night they'll go under leaves to hide from predators. Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to orient during the day for caterpillars. Yeah, good question though. I mean, I think if the weather's been really bad though, it's been rainy and chilly, probably they might just eat on through the night. Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the underwing moths that feed on that plant, they hide in the soil during the daytime,
Oh, and come out at night?
and then they'll crawl up the plant at night,
Clever.
and then they'll go back down. So,
Thank you for that.
yeah, that's one, there are 3 species, but, you know.
So it is a good strategy for some. That's really good to know about. Thank you. Yeah, it's tough life out there for caterpillars. Yes.
Sometimes, actually, probably every time I walk my dog at night, it's always chasing after little moths,
Yes.
especially ones in the grass.
Mm-hmm.
Are those most likely armyworm?
Oh, it's probably a lot of other species. Yeah. I guess the thing that's a bit of a, for me anyway, a steep learning curve is they do look quite similar and that they're so diverse. You know, probably each of us has 20 species in our yard that we don't even realize that we have 20 species, and it could be even higher than that. So you probably do have a lot more than armyworm moths, yeah.
So I would
And
collect them.
yes, and do I have a picture next? Yeah, you could put up a sheet, hang it up off your clothesline, put up a sheet, put up a light, see what comes. And just take pictures too. I think some people have even found new records in the state that way, by taking photos. So that's a way to consider it. But yeah, I think sometimes those species, and you know, sometimes they're day active species that are just hanging out in the grass, resting throughout the night, and then they get flushed out and they move on. Or sometimes they're nocturnal species that are resting until it's fully dark and they're ready to go. So it could be a bit of both. Yeah. My dog also likes to chase moths.
A place to upload photos, like an iNaturalist.
Yeah, you can do iNaturalist for sure. Bug Guide is really good, and it's just BUGGUIDE. It definitely leans on the back of experts that can identify by photos, but at least it can help you get to a certain level, which is also really helpful. And then sometimes it might sit there for a little while, and somebody who's really talented will come in later and figure out a way to categorize it further. So that's really good. But the Nebraska Lepidopterist table, also they do track the species in the state, and they have county information, so that can also help narrow it down for you. That's a great place to start. That's a good question. Although I do love Bug Guide because it's super cool when somebody comes back with an ID. Yeah.
Are there other varieties of plants that I can make sure are around the house to encourage the tomato hornworms to relocate to?
Yeah, I'm trying.
They're not frequent, but you know, when they happen, they come on pretty strong.
Yeah, they're a good example of growing really fast.
Yeah.
They're little tanks. Yeah, they.
Do you favor any other varieties of plants?
Solanaceae plants. I'm trying to think if there's a close relative.
Like wild nightshade? I mean, would they go
Yeah,
after
but you probably don't want wild nightshade in your yard either, right? I don't know. I'll tell you my strategy, which is not a great strategy, but I have a bunch of cherry tomatoes, and they just flourish no matter what you do to them. So then you can just move the caterpillars over there and let them take at it. But like I said, that it's not a
war of attrition?
yeah, it's like a what's the strategy? It's like a trap crop strategy essentially.
Okay.
But I don't know a good alternative off the top of my head for that. It's a good question. Yeah. Yes.
I haven't heard kids because, listen, I'm gonna plant gardens for moss, but not.
Yeah.
Maybe change that culturally, maybe somehow. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a
This one certainly does. Too many kids to go and tell our teenagers.
yeah. It's a great question and great point. I think, the monarch is such a what they call it, like a flagship species, right? Because of its amazing migration and also it's beautiful. I mean, black and orange, what? So visible, large, flashy. Come on, that butterfly has it all. But
It's just a fancy moth.
it's a fancy moth, yeah. I will say, I think your question is so good. I will say all the things that we do for monarchs are really beneficial to a lot of other species. So you can be sure that, even though the monarch gets all the credit, there is a moth that feeds on milkweed, for example. A beautiful, also kind of flashy as a caterpillar, orange and black fuzzy moth, the tussock moth. So that work is good and important. I don't know how to change minds about moths. I'd love to hear from others in the audience. I think it's just maybe introducing them to more, making them aware of what's out there, not to worry about it. I think kids are, naturally not worried. It's just, it kind of comes over time that they become more worried. But yeah, maybe just more information about what is what. I think identifying something is so powerful because suddenly it's not just a moth, it's a tussock moth. And that makes it feel more concrete. It's just like learning plants. Somehow it just opens up the world in a way and you see it differently when you can identify it. So that might be part of it. Yeah, there.
Look at the grizzly bear and say 40,000 moths a day.
Yeah, powering grizzly bears across the nation, right? Well, then if you do have scouts, for example, that are interested in birds, if you want birds, you need moths. It's the way it works. That's how the math works. But this is a good book for identifying caterpillars. It's Caterpillars of Eastern North America by David Wagner. It's just a nice place to just get started on caterpillars. Does anybody know of good moth identification books as adults? Well, there's a gap. Somebody can write it. But I do think overall, ecological education, wherever we can squeeze it in, is important. I really appreciate you asking that. Any other questions? I have exceeded my time slot, but I'm happy to talk more afterwards.
You are totally good, Jennifer. And what I heard is that Pollinator Alliance of the Heartland has a new challenge to build and plant a nighttime flower garden for one of our next projects. So thank you very much for that idea. I love it. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. This concludes our presentation session. So I do want to echo Jennifer's words that we're so happy that you're here, and we want to encourage you to stay active, not only in your own gardens, but also volunteering for some of these great organizations that you met today, including Pollinator Alliance of the Heartland. Collectively together, we can do amazing things, and we're already seeing this process happening. So it's very, very encouraging. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming out to Milkweed and Cookies. We do have surveys out there, and I believe our president will be sending emails. So we want to see pictures of your gardens and all the cool critters that you're seeing that come visit. So just thank you again, and thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah. Thanks.